So what does it mean, Jared? You're not gonna be the liaison? Will you be the liaison if you become mayor?
Well,
Welcome to the era of awkward questions.
I think, yeah, I think either way I won't be here.
Either way, you won't be here.
Either way I won't be here, yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
But this could be your last meeting.
could be.
Next.
Well, there'll be one at the beginning of
October
October.
22nd.
October 22nd?
That can't be right, 'cause there's a
Can't be
council
Yeah,
meeting that night.
yeah.
Did we get a calendar?
It's usually the first week
of
in
the year?
here.
'Cause
Yeah,
I didn't have this meeting.
I guess they're moving out, I think.
Yeah. I
It
know we
moved,
did.
it shifted.
Oh, okay, okay.
The rest are all should be calendar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the October one surely won't happen.
I think it will. I've got 2 items already. 2 would have, this would have been a even bigger agenda.
Daniel's not running for office, so he's a bit.
Yeah.
I think it's Delta, the city manager is running for mayor.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and the mayor's running for councilor.
Mayor's running
So
for
it's
councilor.
just
Oh,
all,
interesting.
yeah,
Wow.
Oh, really? Switch it up, eh?
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sunset,
Yeah.
you know,
sure,
just
yes.
come on the council, because
Yeah.
you got all the information, probably be pretty easy for you.
Well, let's get started.
Sure.
Martin can join us.
Yeah.
So I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have our red lights on. So the first item of business is approval of tonight's agenda. Do I have a motion?
Just have one late item, it's information item.
All right.
So it'll be number 6.2, and it came from council. Community lands workshop report was presented by Councilor Nicholson to council, and council resolved to have all of the committees receive this information. So I'll add to a revised and send it out. There's a link. If you'd like me to print the report, I can do that and give it to you before you leave the building tonight.
Sure.
One.
It's a lot of pages.
Pages, I think. Like-
Well, it's probably 40 or 50.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, no,
No.
it's not that big.
It's
Very
So I can
big.
check.
I mean, I've got a hard copy, it's
I have it up to
20.
Yeah,
Is
something
it?
like
It's
that,
only
yeah.
20?
It's a little booklet.
Yeah.
Made it specifically reasonably short.
Yeah,
This is the
Well,
workshop
yeah.
that David, you and Dennis?
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If it's 20, I'd like
Where is a copy, Steph? I'll go get it. Where's the copy?
I don't have a hard copy, I can just
I have a hard
put
copy.
this link though, and print a couple.
Maybe just pass it around, see if anybody really wants one. It's fascinating.
They better.
Yeah.
It's an excellent report.
Yes.
I understand it was a good,
Good exercise, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic.
so we'll add that to tonight's agenda as item 6.2. So I have a motion to, for approval of tonight's agenda. David Lynch, second. David Hawking, all in favor? Thank you. So, and then second item is adoption of the minutes of our meeting of May 23rd, which are attached.
Oh, yes.
Do I have a motion to adopt the minutes? Kirsty, second. Dennis, all in favor? Thank you. We are carried. Public comments, I see the public is not wasn't asked for any presents tonight. So we can leap right into council referrals. And I guess we'll start, Dan, can you give us a little?
Is that us?
That's us. There's a delay.
You're watching us on TV?
Sure, so this referral is a council-initiated rezoning of a municipally owned property located just off of Salal Road. So now if you know where sort of Veterans Park is, so it's this larger rural zoned property. This is Salal Road coming off of Sunset, and this is Bishop's Hill. So if you're coming by foot, I guess, up the hill. But and this is a road that seems to have many names, but in our system it's Athletic Park Drive. And so this is sometimes
How
known as,
creative.
yeah, sometimes known as Athletic Park property, and right now Veterans Park in the rezoning. So it's a property that the municipality got as part of the Cowan Point rezoning, and so the initial plan in the OCP identifies it as a school and athletic field site, or at least it identifies this sort of general area as what would happen here. So in 2017, as some of you probably remember, Gary Anderson came to council and wanted to propose that this be used as a park that volunteers would create for the Loggers Sports Show. And so council issued a temporary use permit for the recreation uses and also for the public works yard. So public works had been using the southern portion of the lot as a sort of auxiliary works yard. So council issued a temporary use permit to govern those uses. In 2017 for a 2-year term, it expires June of 2019.
And it can be renewed once.
And it can be renewed. So this
For 2 years maximum, or?
it can be renewed, I guess, for 2 additional years. And now the Local Government Act allows 3 years. So if it was renewed, council could then just do it again for a 3-year term. Like it can be essentially a new permit would be issued, but it could be council could do that again. But in I think July or June maybe. June of this year, a delegation came proposing disc golf as part of some of the uses on this site, and council at that point said, okay, rather than saying let's do it, rather than thinking about renewing a temporary use permit, let's start a rezoning initiative and have staff bring a rezoning application forward. So in terms of temporary use permit, right now what it does is it says this is the public works yard, is this area in here, this is the area for outdoor assembly use, so for events. And the rest of it in the temporary use permit is just designated as park. There's a riparian zone that comes down one side of the property as well.
Now, is that the actual area that they've been using for the activity area? Because it's kind of hard to figure out how,
Yeah.
on the land, how that works.
Yeah, so I believe the first year that was defined. I don't know since then. I think they've expanded, and I don't know if they still fit. They have not expanded further into the riparian zone, but I'm not entirely, it may be slightly outside those boundaries.
It has a different shape than the blue outline on the aerial photo.
Right. So this is just showing the southern part of the lot itself. So
I see.
so we're showing up to about here
Got it.
of where the, so this is essentially, this
Oh,
is
yeah,
the work
this
yard.
red
You see where
box
the-
there.
Yeah, you can't, it's hard to see.
Mm.
That's what's there. Right, so this was the council motion. And let's go through this. All right, so currently in the OCP, it's like the Cowan Point Comprehensive Development Area, CDA 1, and then in the description of that, it talks about it being used for school athletic fields. In the land use bylaw, it's zoned rural residential 3, so it allows residential use as a dwelling, it allows agriculture, horticulture, kennel, whatever else we allow in rural zones.
Why is the zone so disparate from the OCP descriptive?
I don't know, other than
Maybe
it was
they're really-
just
they're
remember
really
rezone.
A
Yeah,
million miles apart.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. Other than the OCP. Yeah, I don't have a good answer. Yeah. So essentially, what staff have proposed to council for that introduction, and we're looking for comment on, is essentially they're looking at, okay, actually split zoning the property and having the different designations. So designate the majority of it in the OCP as park, with a portion of it as industrial for the industrial medium for the works yard, the same as our the recycling center essentially, and rezone the rest of it for a multi-use activity park. Yeah, and that's essentially it. It's sort of talk through, okay, what would the zone be? Generally, we don't favor split zone parcels. It's something we try to avoid. We end up with some, but it's not favored. And we try to talk through, okay, what are other options? Other options would be essentially to rezone it with a goal to subdivide it. So to subdivide it into the different pieces.
You could do it as a CD zone and have different uses within the CD zone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just following from the
Yeah.
descriptor in the OCP, does changing that description to municipal park and changing the zoning to multi-use activity park and industrial uses, does that preclude the concept of that at some point becoming a school? Is that a difficult shift back?
It would be a shift back, for sure.
Yeah,
So that's as part of this initial step, I think, would be consulting with the school board, essentially to say, do you have intentions of, I don't know, sort of when this was done, that was the thinking is we'll maybe to be opening another school on the west side of Bowen.
right.
And
It
maybe this is
might
a
not
future
be,
site.
I mean, it could be, for instance, IDLC or something under a different,
Yeah,
under a different flag, different banner.
yeah,
I just, because conceptually, I kind of get the idea that there's a parcel of property that
Yeah.
could be used for school in the future.
yeah,
As things densify, that might make even more sense.
yeah.
I'm just wondering whether, I'm wondering about how prudent it is to move it in a completely different direction.
I was wondering about this, as things densify, the idea of another school, yes, but that's pretty hard to get to. And, I mean, it is geographically quite close to the Adams Road area, but it's up considerable hill.
Right.
And there's no road right now, because it could be a road, I presume there's an allowance.
Well, there was a road there.
Well,
It's
Bishop's
never
Hill
been
is the
finished.
road.
Bishop's Hill, but this breaks off.
No, the other one
Like
is
here or this way. from
You can come
Willie's
up
Way.
Sunset and go in that.
And go that way, but it's a
But
long
that-
way from
Yeah.
anybody.
Oh, yeah, that's a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no like alternate route through here. It would be essentially removing the gate, I guess, and getting a gondola instead of a school bus.
What's the name of that road? Because that road there was the one that was supposed to connect to the bottom of Athletic Park Road.
Yeah, it's,
This one,
What's the name of that?
it's,
is this Willie's?
in the document.
And it's got the big easement.
I mean, the
It's
one that
Willie's-
goes off
Willie's-
Bishop
Willie's-
Hill.
Willie's
Yeah.
Way.
Yeah, off to the right, yeah.
Willie's
Willie's
Way.
Way,
Is
yeah.
it Willie Way? Is it Willie's Way?
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
And their houses along there kind of to the end, and then
Yeah.
it ends.
Yeah. And then it looks like Athletic Park Drive continues to about here.
Yeah.
So
About
it
as
could
far as
easily
you
be
get.
joined up.
They talked about it once and the people just went absolutely
Yeah.
haywire.
What did they?
Yeah, but, you know, they bought the property knowing that it was
Yeah, yeah.
that it was a designated road.
Surprise.
Surprise.
Any further discussion?
Sorry, back to the school. So was the school board involved in the discussion to put that as a school site, or do we know, was it potential?
Yeah,
school
I
site?
mean, I've looked through the files and I don't see it as like a central, I think it was more seen as terms of like when Cowan Point development was going ahead and saying, well, gee, we're gonna add all these houses.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be good thinking at the time to put in a school site designated, but I can't see that it was driven by the school board.
Would it be, yeah, so you'd have to rezone it back again if it's school
Yeah.
land, but if there's not gonna be, if it's just there's no structures on municipal park, like what is proposed now, we make it into a municipal park, and what is proposed, like, then people, like,
Yeah, I mean, in
no,
terms
the
of,
media's
Right
wanting
now,
to
you
spend
can build
money,
housing
right?
What
with the
house?
current, with the current,
Yes, but in the park one, you can't.
right.
yeah, I mean, in terms of proposed from council, I mean, essentially it's, you know, it's the field that's there now that potentially then would have zoning for events. So whether the Loggers Sport Show wants to continue there, or whether they move back to Crippler Park, you know, they can do it, and then we've now got a proposal for disc golf field, but I don't think beyond that, there's not plans for.
A golf field?
Disc
golf.
golf.
Disc golf.
Frisbee.
Frisbee.
Disc golf? Yeah, you don't know what disc golf?
No, I've never.
Where
Oh,
are you?
come on.
Where are you
You don't need to buy clubs or anything.
What, the industrial, municipal industrial,
Yeah.
what's planned for there? I mean, why is that designation even there?
Good question. How did he get there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one. So in terms of what's proposed there, I mean, essentially it's proposed to continue to be, you know, essentially auxiliary public works, satellite public works yard.
They don't use it for anything.
They use it for storage, and they use it for even for like salt storage in the winter. So as Bob said, essentially it's like to come from public works. Like if the public works yard is their only salt depot on the island, then they have great trouble doing the west side because essentially somebody does a run out
Right.
and then they come all the way back and they load up and they do. So essentially having the second one on the west side allows them to operate better. So they value having a west side public works yard.
It's a great use for right next to a repairing zone.
Yeah.
Can I just ask what a WASP development permit area is?
Sure, it's watershed aquifer stream protection area.
Ah.
So it's our
Oh, I
WASP.
thought it was a white Anglo-Saxon.
That sounds like the whole island.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So there, just to confirm what Kirsty said, so there are no structures permitted in a multi-use activity park? Or limited structures, or?
Yeah, it would permit, essentially accessory structures. Let's try to find the zone. Most of our zones, like our park zones, allow, structures auxiliary too, so it would allow like gazebo or shelter.
Right.
But not like I said, if it goes to municipal park and there's not a whole bunch of, big structures, then it's pretty easy to, if the need arises, to change it again, like it allows it.
Yeah.
Right. So they just, to the split zoning, the industrial medium, what would that worst case, what kind of factories we're gonna have next to our park?
Public works yard, transfer station, recycling depot, compost facility, cottage industry.
Well, it's certainly pretty much in the middle of nowhere, so I can't see it harming the neighbors.
No, I guess the thrust of it is that it solves a bit of an issue. Temporary use permits really shouldn't be used for this kind of thing. That's my sense, right? And have been no other groups or coming looking for some other use on the property apart from the frisbee players.
No, I think when we had the compost working group and they had done a study, I think it was one of the sites they looked at more because they were looking at
Right.
municipally owned properties. And I don't think they liked it, partly because it's not central.
Right. All right. Any further questions, discussion, David?
Since this is municipal land, and the municipality can pretty well use it, is it necessary that the area?
In order to accommodate that are current and proposed for the land, or it could, according to what Daniel has said, for the next 3 years, they could continue to operate under a temporary use permit and still have the loggers, event, and whatever. But then something would need to happen, because you're going to do it once. You only renew once on a temporary use permit.
And when you're allowed to renew it once,
Right.
I mean, it was 2 years the first time.
Before.
You have a perpetual
Did they get
temporary
renewed?
use permit?
Yeah. So it's often used like for like gravel pits on crown land or something. You just keep,
Uh-huh.
when came out when you want, it would just keep rolling over and you
Right.
so they're temporary use, but they last.
This is a use that the municipality is the sole person in charge. So theoretically, they could either not bother rezoning it or rezone it for 5 years rolling over. Could they not?
So I guess like me as the planner would say what we're doing should be matching our land use. Whether or not just because council can rezone it, I would say, well, if everybody, if nothing else, we have to follow our own zoning bylaw. We can't ignore it.
Right. So what's planning's position on this? Do you favor continuing temporary use permit, or do you,
I would favor zoning it,
yeah,
yeah. And I'd say we probably struggled with it in that, in general, I think we prefer, like, not the CD zone, partly because we have so many, which is,
right,
you know, a little overkill. And partly even the idea of, like, generally parkland, it's nice not to be in the CD zone, because then when you're looking, even just for visibility on the map, it's like you can see where the parks are, it sort of doubles as the park map and stuff,
right.
rather than hiding stuff within it. And then I would say there's some appetite that the industrial be defined, so we don't zone the whole property and say, well, it's all can either be Public Works yard or park.
Yeah,
It's a
because
little-
this would allow unlimited one or the other, right?
Yeah, and so industrial medium in a set area. It's
So I
not like,
understand you can't do.
an impediment, because then when you subdivide and you subdivide a park, each of the zone pieces has to be the same size as the minimum size in the bylaw.
Right.
But that's okay. And then in terms of that too, then we're thinking, well, we probably don't want to have to subdivide it, just to to subdivide out the parcel.
So there is not,
Council essentially to introduce it and to go to the what park category they wanted before we draft the bylaw to come back for readings.
size of the brown bit and the green bit. I mean, can we,
Yeah.
can our recommendation include a limitation of the size
Yeah.
of the P2?
I know that was a question Emma got when she brought it, and I think I looked up at the time, and it's sort of, it's like 3 or 4. 8.
It looks like that. The
Yeah.
other one's 1.1.
Yeah.
What's the general consensus around the table? Is the commission generally moving towards thinking this is a reasonable idea to rezone the parcel and the split zone is okay? And
Maybe, I wouldn't mind some additional wording, perhaps saying that substantial buildings or something, we don't want substantial buildings to allow flexibility on into the future if, just so that it's not a one-way street. You can't do anything else with it.
if it's $1 million park building, we can do something.
But,
All right, someone try and craft a recommendation to council?
Is that the advisor?
I think it's kind of difficult to just sort of say buildings.
No, I think the
Council.
itself is the inherent. You know, I don't think we can, without going
What
back
does
and
P2 say?
redefining, well, Dan just read it. Can you read that again, P2?
Well, so P2 allows open space, interpretive information center, athletic park, hard surface courts, outdoor assembly, play fields, playgrounds, other outdoor recreation facilities, nature protection. And then it allows buildings and structures accessory to permitted uses.
The $1 million building.
Yeah.
It could be converted into,
The decisions are going to be entirely up to council sometime in the future, aren't they? It's not as though we're opening the land up to developers who are going to say, hey, we have the right to put up a...
no, that's correct.
That's correct.
As long as, yeah, because the
We're having a
ownership will stay with
with
the
the
the community
municipality.
can lease it. Can they not?
But it would,
For a part, like, because
They'd have to rezone it though.
like,
yeah, I mean, to lease the land for more than 3 years, we would have to subdivide it.
oh, okay.
So it'd be one thing, I guess, it's like we could enter into a partnership with somebody to say, we'll build a hockey rink and then you can use it and you pay us money over time or something to subdivide.
So it might in the end be beneficial. That's it, right?
So maybe one thing is like, does the APC support the rezoning, but, encourage, are you encouraging future flexibility, or are you encouraging like consultation now with the school board to ensure?
No, I think encourage
Okay.
1 acre. No, whatever. How are we doing here, Steph?
The Advisory Planning Commission support the proposed rezoning of Veterans Park to OCP, Municipal Park and Industrial, all that, with the following comments. The EPC encourages future flexibility and limitation on,
The size of the industrial component
To its current area.
to its current area.
Well, wait a minute, what if the municipality feels they need a little more room?
We're only recommending and encouraging.
And, yeah,
Because the split zoning does, I don't know, you can't, well, you can roughly define some
Yeah.
area within it.
Yeah. Yeah, like we'll define, it'll have a bylaw map that would define the area. Having said that, on the ground, then if Bob said, well, I need two more trees, it can be hard to pin it down. It's not like there's there won't be survey points or something, but it would be there in terms of
Right.
yeah,
the general area.
yeah, within a few 100 feet,
Yeah.
usually.
so when you say encourages future flexibility, when you, after say encourages limitation on industrial.
Can we say-
Future flexibility of the P2 component for changes of use on the P2 parcel. Future flexibility for changes of use on the P2 parcel, and
So that means don't let the axe and hatchet guys do anything that can be moved.
that's right, exactly. They suddenly become log mansion builders.
Logger sport, just build
Yeah.
a log cabin.
That's right.
How's that now, Scott?
That the, sorry, EPC support the proposed rezoning to all those. The following comment, the EPC encourages future flexibility regarding changes of use on the P2 parcel and encourages limitation on the size of the industrial component to its current area.
I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Do I have a motion to that effect? Kirsty, second. David Wrench. Further comments, questions? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Moving on. Back to the beach.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
This recreation area, what are they gonna do for water? Will they be allowed to put in a well?
If they put in a swimming pool first.
Yeah.
I think the municipality could drill a well.
They could, because there's riparian zone right along.
Yeah.
You put a well in there somewhere.
Yeah, so I believe for the Veterans Park, they were bringing in water. I think it's my understanding, there's no well on site right now.
There are no facilities on site.
Yeah.
Facilities for waste either.
Right.
Yeah.
So the porta potties are just there for the,
For the event.
and then they just.
Yeah, the event rents them in.
Because that certainly is something that, the Frisbee people, they need to have a porta potty.
Yeah, it sort of discourages prolonged use, I guess. Yeah, discourages prolonged use. You're there for a bit and then you're leaving.
Exactly.
And then-
Well, don't clear the shrubs.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next item, which is the docks. And then rezoning the limits of WG1. It's a big one.
Oh God,
It
that's
is
a
a big-
big document. I know,
It's a
I know.
big one.
5 minutes to load again.
All right, so everyone's favorite topic. So here, referral for the WG1 zone amendment. So reminder, the WG1 zone is the water general zone. So WG1 is everywhere from, so Cape Breton Curtis is within a zone variation of WG1B, and the normal WG1 refers, it's essentially the entire coastline other than some parts right within Snug Cove. So the various marinas are in water commercial zones, but the rest essentially everywhere below the high water mark to 300 meters offshore is the WG1 zone. A number of regulations if you want to build a dock. So line to regulate setbacks, public beach access, maximum area of the maximum area of the float, the maximum width of the gangway, the maximum length of the gangway. And then we have this one provision here that says any community dock, private moorage facility, or group moorage facility shall be located such that it will not impede pedestrian access along the beach portion of the foreshore or negatively impact eelgrass meadows, kelp beds, clam beds, or mussel. For a crown line tank dock, that's you're not impeding pedestrian access across the beach. So for example, when I was thinking of the summer at Tunstall Beach, for example, has the Tunstall Bay Community Association dock. Goes from the high portion, it goes over the beach, and it goes out to the float. So we would have said that that does not impede pedestrian access along the beach, just for sort of context. So we talk about protecting the shoreline. Steps to be taken, they'll say we'll continue to run maps where docks are permitted, and bylaws have been updated to reflect greater protection for public beaches and the recreational foreshore. So April 23rd, 2018, Council made the motion that Council instruct staff to begin preparation of the bylaw to amend Land Use Bylaw 57 to fourth meeting, and we've now referred it to the ABC for comment and to the Islands Trust. So just some background, the OCP has a dock policy. Policy 67 says private moorage will not impede pedestrian access along the beach portion of foreshore. The siting of new private moorage will be undertaken in a manner integration with materials and projections for private. Oh, and so the other one that Council had talked about was providing comment on ramifications of changing the wording from what we currently say no negative impact on eelgrass meadows, and they wanted discussion on changing that to eelgrass habitat. So what we did is we looked at a report by the Islands Trust Fund that looked at near-shore eelgrass inventory, and it has to do with light availability and the depth came back. Things can potentially be generally.
That's the other side of that.
Yeah, beds that are flat or continuous or fringing, and it tends to be when we get biophysical reports, they identify when they're a meadow. So to have people show that there's no negative impact on eelgrass meadows, we have them do a biophysical, so they do dive tests.
Okay.
And they'll report, and it's a certain density of eelgrass shoots. And so I think the motivation behind Council's there's not negative impact. So Council paid the dock going forward because they felt like, okay, well, we said eelgrass meadows and it's not a meadow, there's just eelgrass. But I don't think they were entirely happy about it, so they wanted to look at it. So staff then proposed to change it to talk about negative impact on eelgrass meadows, beds, or patches to capture those different things that the Islands Trust sort of mapped and identified. Should be located such that it will not impede foreshore. It now talks about will be located such or restrict public use.
We divide a beach.
It was in 2013. I believe in prior to that, it talked about physically dividing a beach.
And that was taken out for some reason.
Yeah.
And now the push is to put it back in.
Yeah.
And so I'm asking again, what does that mean? That sounds like anything that crosses it divides it.
That's correct.
That's what I believe. Yeah.
So
No
So
dock
that-
would be built.
the B, C, D, and E don't have no bearing because all beaches will do A, and so they're prohibited.
Well,
Yeah, also
docks.
on a dock across the beach, yeah, would be, so the Tunstall Bay, for example, the community association, if that wasn't there and they proposed it, we would say based on our bylaw, we would say that physically divides the beach.
And so if it is hurt in a storm, they can't rebuild?
Well, then it would be grandfathered, so it'd be grandfathered with respect to siting, so they can maintain it, they can repair it. but they can't, if it's entirely gone, they couldn't replace it.
So is it 50% of the value? What's the?
So if it's a use,
building?
if it's a use that's non-conforming, it's 75% of the value above the foundation. If it's with regard to siting, it's a different calculation. It doesn't talk about 75%, and it just talks about you can maintain it, you can repair it, but you can't replace it.
Because docks have to be replaced every number of years.
Yeah, so I think in essence, if you were a non-conforming because of siting, if you replaced it gradually, you'd be okay.
You do it piece by piece.
Yeah, so it's like replacing the boat when you replace each one piece, and is it the same boat?
Find this, it's basically to prevent anybody building a dock on Bowen on an island, and it just frosts me off that we're looking at this again. I think we put enough regulations in place.
Well, this is good, so now you get a chance to vote in that direction. Sorry, Dan, I
Yeah.
kind of jumped right in
No,
there.
it's okay.
You can carry on if you, David, you have a question?
It seems to me that step A can't be in there. It stops from all wharfs.
Right. That seems to be the intention.
Yes.
When it was, can I ask the
Yeah.
corollary then?
Yeah.
And when it was amended, the municipality had sought, I presume, some legal counsel. And then they amended the bylaw, and that phrase was taken out.
Yeah.
Was it taken out on the basis of legal counsel?
Like when the previous amendment?
Yes.
When it went to
When the bylaw had that phrase in it,
Yeah,
and then actions were taken to take it out,
yeah.
that was done because council got some legal advice on how the bylaw should read. And was part of that legal advice that you should not have a phrase like that in your bylaw?
So I guess I'd say one is probably if we received legal advice and probably couldn't discuss it publicly. I would say that, like in drafting this bylaw, like with almost all our bylaws, so this current bylaw 466, that it was reviewed by our legal
Right.
counsel. Like this current one with the language physically divide a beach.
So it would go back to them, in other words. It has not yet gone to,
No, so it has gone, like,
oh, it has?
yeah,
So they reviewed it and
Yeah.
there's not a legal problem with it.
But they weren't really asked that particular question. They may have just sort of glossed over it.
over the past probably 5 years, our lawyers have been quite adept at dock bylaws.
Sensitive.
It's his new specialty.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get real good at it.
Sorry, Gary, do you have a comment?
Comment on it, because physically divided beach, pedestrian access along a beach, totally different things. If it physically divides a beach, it supersedes B, and like you said, probably the rest of them too, the discussion, well, the council voted for it, but of course it wasn't quite unanimous. What's the definition of beach? Right. Some information. And it came sort of very well defined. So it was shore, which was never intended. I don't think, obviously it was, but that means that anywhere where you can get access to any beach below high water, go on for miles. The objection I had, of course, was that there's no map what's going to be legal and what's not going to be legal.
Map of the island or drawing?
Map of the island. So if you are going to make an assessment of this amendment, you don't have a map to tell you whether or not it's going to affect you.
Well, if it's part of the WG1 zone.
Oh, yes, but it's going across a beach, and the beach coming to, Dan, more information. But anyway, that's up to you.
So,
Yeah.
you got those two chunks, A and C, in terms of the policy.
So at the council discussion, they sort of were relating it to when there's like, if there's sort of area adjacent to that would be restricted. There's a dock there.
Access, there's an
Yeah.
easement from the
Yeah.
public to come down.
Yeah.
And there's a 10-meter
10 meter,
setback
yeah.
from that easement.
Yeah.
So I don't,
But wouldn't any dock
under the town. So there's a evidently removing the provision from the bylaw. Do you have any staff? Not accident. That's good. That's good. Well, I mean, maybe they just didn't understand what was happening.
Oh, right, accidentally,
Yeah.
Because somebody else raised, why was it changed back then? And I would be curious to know that before for doing it then. It was too restricted.
Question, Gary, in terms of the point of A.
Yeah.
So obviously, everything else you don't even need if you just have A. So did that discussion come up at council? Like how is A justified? Because A doesn't.
I only think B becomes absolutely superfluous.
Like D and E come into play differently. So I know like A and stuff where they're on a block, right? And so then it comes into we're looking at.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
D and E are about
Yeah.
natural habitat.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
about, it's about something else.
Yeah.
But you're saying you're thinking if something was rejected under A,
I just don't
Or
understand what
you
the
wouldn't
debate
come
was
up
like.
You could
Council,
always
since
use A to reject an
everything.
application.
So there was no point even having the rest of the.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's not true from what.
Well, there's different circumstances. You could also have a dock that's not
On the beach.
on a beach.
yeah.
Yeah, you could argue that your dock is going,
That's true, okay.
Yeah.
It's
on the
not
block.
the beach.
That's the
So
way
B
around
have
that.
nothing to do with beach.
but if everything's a beach,
Yeah.
then you only need A.
But
And we don't know what a beach
Yeah.
is because,
Life's a beach.
Well, except, that's one of those things, we know it when we see it, but then if you're asked to articulate, I mean, maybe this is really in left field, but is there a possibility of zoning beach areas?
I think.
I think
That's-
so.
Yeah,
Like there's sort of
Should be a map.
like. Like, so I know looking at the previous council when they put in this, so that was that 2014 rezoning, looking through some of the files, they spent some time trying to define beaches, because that would be one option, you just make it like WG1C and say there's no docks in these areas,
C,
right?
SEA.
Or something. Like, yeah, there you go. And you'd have on the map, and you'd say all these areas have no
Exactly,
docks,
so
right?
anybody who bought land there would know that they're buying adjacent to a place where they're gonna have trouble building a dock.
And I think the council got bogged down at the time in terms of, like, you start with beaches that everyone agrees are beaches, and you go, okay, well, obviously, like, Sandy Beach is a beach, or Pebbly Beach is a
Yeah.
beach, or Tunstall
Public,
Beach, right?
sort of public beaches.
You know, as you get down the list, at some point, people are drawing lines at different points in terms of what are beaches and what aren't.
Then
That's my
the
understanding.
Parks Committee they've done some work on
They-
identifying beaches.
So they map beaches that have public access.
That's all, okay,
Yeah.
but there are other beaches there. But then is there a public part of that beach? Like
so
an actual owned by the municipality?
All beaches are public in terms
yes,
of like
yeah.
below high
Below
water.
high water
So
mark,
they
yeah.
map beaches that have public access, so the public
Okay.
can access
All
from land as opposed to from sea is
Okay.
what they have a map of.
Can I ask a
Okay, well, that's
a
interesting.
slightly different question?
Uh,
I'm aware that there are parcels on the island which are only accessible by water. So if I have a parcel like
Yeah.
that happens to have a beach in front of it.
Yeah.
With this bylaw, I can't put a dock in
Oh,
to bring my boat.
Well, that's,
That's the only way I can get
That's
to my
true.
boat.
yeah.
That'd be correct.
Yeah, that seems a
That's-
pretty unfair.
that does seem right.
Colossally unfair.
I would, going back to the actual wording, the fact that you have physically divide a beach, which is really very vague. I mean, physically divide, yeah, but how physically? You know, on the ground, in the air?
No, it doesn't matter, it's just if it's a line across the beach from overhead, that's it, doesn't matter.
Well,
where it is,
but that's arguable, because you then have in impede pedestrian access and stuff, so that would start to say, that you're defining it as, you know, physically dividing a beach, being a different criteria than the others, not superseding everything. So it's not the be all and end all that if you physically divide a beach, game's over for anything. You're sort of saying, okay, well, we've obviously defined it as something a little different because underneath it we say impeding pedestrian along, access along portion of foreshore, limiting restricted public use of beach. That, to me, if I was an attorney,
Right.
would argue that, well, you have put these things in there, so you are de facto limiting this physically divided beach.
Ask Daniel with that physically divided, because we went through that in council.
Well,
And
I'm
under
sure.
no circumstances does it mean that you can go, you cannot put, and as we said, you cannot put a line across the top of it. If you're looking down on it, you can't put a line across
A
that beach.
structure will inherently be physical.
Yeah.
If
What it really is,
if
it's a,
it goes from the land to the water, it will cross something which may often be defined as a beach.
Correct.
because
So
really what it
that-
is a prohibition.
It
It's
is,
totally a prohibition.
Because,
Yeah.
What-
and I don't know if this,
That
I'm
was-
new to the commission here, and I don't know if we don't make the legislative decisions.
We make
But it-
recommendations to council.
Yeah, but if the intention is to essentially prohibit docks on beaches,
That's what, just say it.
so say it, because right now that just gives rise to confusion and the public not
Right.
understanding.
And I think it also, so the question, there's another question within that, which is, has the municipality been experiencing problems with the bylaw the way it stands now? With the zoning,
No?
with the wording? So what's behind the wish to change the wording back to this?
You need to remove A, B, and C.
Then we have the zoning the way it is now, David.
Or A and C.
So-
Like, B is currently there.
B is currently there, yeah.
And that's not that, that just means you have to be able to walk underneath it.
Yeah.
I mean, I support the notion of improving habitat, so adding beds and patches to the eelgrass component, I have no problem with that. I'm totally challenged by the first clause.
So I think asking if
For
it's
for a
worth it.
multitude of reasons.
Like in my time here, we've done a number of of dock referrals. And I was trying to think, and I don't know if I can think of any that would have been across a beach in my time here.
How did you know that it was not across the beach?
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe fair, but,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
I was
that's my point,
essentially, like, when this came up and when I was writing the second reading report, that's sort of when I became involved. I went through sort of the ones from 2017, all the referrals I did, and then I was sort of trying to think back the previous ones. So maybe one or two in Smuggler's Cove, I think maybe went across what we'd call a beach, but a lot of beach. So I would say behind the one that's like across the beach somewhere.
Well, and then we've got the other stuff to guide that. I'm sort of leaning toward recommending we take out A, but also recommend that council initiate a mapping of the survey it. And you who has only boat access and, or rebuild.
yeah, Tunstall Bay dock burns down, for instance, then you can't replace it bit by bit, and now it's done. And Tunstall Bay dock is a very important feature on Bowen Island.
Is it? I've never seen it used. And I live there.
Well, it's been there, people can fish off it, they can,
Pieces of it at a time, HPC, so we're not gonna sit down with all of it, but what are things that we want to look at, and not to say even that, you know, if we wanna look at and review it, that, okay, we're gonna change it all and rewrite it, but it's more like 2002 we adopted the bylaw, most of the definitions I think continue from before then, so what are,
Daniel, it's open in your computer.
it is indeed.
You know what, I made a copy.
Yeah, it's closed. Yeah, I just closed it,
Okay.
There you go.
there we go, hey,
That's it right there.
yeah.
Don't leave.
Don't,
Yeah.
Oh,
Height.
well, we've got, yeah, height thing, and we've got, average height.
27 feet.
Two possibilities there, or three possibilities there. Same thing.
Highest points.
What's the sort of going, I mean, obviously, there's all kinds of different examples here, but what's the
Well,
going?
I think Daniel's kind of pointed to it, it's all over the map, it's
Yeah.
you go, every regional district and municipality you go to is a different,
Right.
different definition.
Yeah.
This one's pretty common.
Yeah.
It's a flat roof, you measure the top of the
Yeah.
floor.
Agreed.
It's probably more common with a gable type roof, or it could be a hip roof, to measure to the midpoint.
Correct, otherwise, if you put it to the top, everybody's gonna have flat
It
roofs.
does, occasionally you find it to the absolute maximum peak, but it's more common to the midpoint between the eave and the ridge.
And it's gonna,
That's-
it's gonna restrict your floor space inside.
If, well,
No.
Gary, what it leads to is more interesting buildings, because then you're not penalized
If you
by
go to
doing
the
a
top.
peak.
This part has gone outside of some kind of invisible angle.
Yeah.
Well, that's right, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Otherwise, you'd see a lot of flat roof buildings, because
Yeah.
they'll maximize their space. This way they can give a little attic space, but it's a more interesting building that doesn't look.
So, but this ends up being taller.
Oh, I see, yeah, yeah.
because you push everything up.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So, and then, so this is all sort of simplistic, and then the third one, which is the shed roof, which is actually the most difficult one, because if you follow from here, and you go to the midpoint, well, that's fine, you're actually building quite a bit, potentially building quite a bit of space there, which is not going up and being truncated and coming back down, it's extending, let's say this actually goes up a bit higher. So you're getting to build quite a, piece of space up here that's high.
But it's not habitable space.
No, so I'm not,
Well, it could be some kind of a loft or something like that.
Well, what are we trying to prevent? Are we trying to prevent view corridors, or are we trying to prevent square footage? Because they're,
Probably neither. It's more about view from
Yeah.
other properties.
because I just was wondering if you put that, like,
Overlook and shadowing and all of that stuff.
because who cares if they get more floor space on the shed roof thing,
Right.
if it meets a height restriction, would be my guess, yeah.
We're looking at some contention about 27 feet, isn't that the normal?
9 meters.
9 meters.
9 meters, yeah, it varies. I've done quite a lot of work in the Squamish Lower Regional District, and there it's 11 meters. I think Sunshine Coast Regional District is also higher than 9, it's 11 also. So Bowen is not the most restrictive, but it is somewhat more restrictive. And I think this is the one that's particularly proving challenging for planning. There's a lot of different solutions for this. I mean, this is simple. And then you can get into the situation where, make it simple-ish, but, let's say the land is doing something like this. And it comes up over here. So that's when certain things start to get to be a little bit more tricky. District in North Vancouver has provisions where they measure the points around the building, and you take an average of those, and then you establish an imaginary line that runs down somewhere through the middle of that, and then you have, there's 2 envelopes, I think it's 2 in North Van, around the volume of the
Yeah.
building, you have to stay within. So in this example, you might have one envelope that goes up like this, and you're going to be within that one, and then there's another one that's smaller because the property is falling away towards you. So you have this kind of cramped, weird geometry. It becomes pretty challenging to work within it and design to it. So there's a point at which it would be just really overly complicated, and it's not really helpful to anyone except the planners, who get to get a lot of work, get a lot of work out of it. I don't think Dan is looking for complex solutions here, but rather just to have some consistency.
Yeah, so I think so with a height one, we talk about pitched roofs, and we have sort of a definition of how you would average it, depends if you have a ceiling or not, and you get to the midpoint. And then I find over the years I've gotten into several fights with people as they propose the shed roofs. In terms of because as we interpret it, we measure to the top of the shed roof. And people are essentially saying, well, that's not fair. And they're saying your height doesn't say you're measuring to the top of a shed roof.
Many bylaws say sloped to the center line is a midpoint
Yeah.
sloped roof.
Yeah.
If it's a sloped roof, then it covers gables,
Yeah.
hips,
Yeah.
and
Right.
sheds.
Yeah.
I think that's a good
Yeah.
change.
The,
And I don't
So
have I don't have like a philosophical, I just like it to say, we're gonna measure to the
Clear.
midpoint of a
Yeah,
shed,
very
like to be
clear.
clear, that that's
Exactly.
what we're doing, and, maybe we have a diagram for that too.
there's
so
there's a
people-
related question which I started to get into
Yeah.
here, which has to do with where you measure from. But
Right.
the first
That's
thing
what I
is
said,
about
yeah.
the roof.
First, yeah. I totally support, and I've written a lot of zoning ordinances to the midpoint of the roofs, because it just it makes a more interesting community, and view. And shed roof, who cares? It's a little point up thing, what you don't want is a bunch of flat roofs.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'd say midpoint,
Yeah, it's
everything.
unique.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then the height, building height, I think what you could do is you can take the average of each side and determine your height, maximum height from the middle.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated, that one, and there's a lot of different solutions to it. So let's just do a roof form
Okay.
first. And then we can go to that other question. I'm with Dennis on this one. I think the measurement to all sloped roofs should be to the midpoint. I think it does give some design flexibility. Further complications arise. This building, if it was the building that I designed recently for clients over on Salt Spring, it has a piece on the back which is flat. So there's a couple of different roof forms within it. So each roof form has to comply with the rules for that roof form.
And we do that now, like we say, if you've got both, then we calculate both, right? And so
Yeah.
we measure, okay, what's the midpoint of the shed, and then what's the
Right.
height of your flat? And we do
Exactly.
that.
Yeah,
So if this is the point from which we're measuring, then we measure up for this one and then this one, and they need to be the same. So this needs to be below the midpoint really of that.
Yeah.
David, sorry?
Just a matter of question here. I mean, do you really care how high a house is if it doesn't impede somebody else's view? I mean, we've got so many places in Bowen, they're tucked away in the woods, they're on a cliff, and if they built a house 100 feet high, when there's nobody behind them, wouldn't make any difference anyway.
Kind of goes to the next part of this question, because Bowen has a lot of properties that are like this. And slow properties, you can take advantage of some of the rules. And where you would normally only get a 2-story building, you might get a 3 or a 3-story plus building.
Right.
Because you're averaging as you go around it, which may be fine also, but it may not feel fair to everyone. So, I mean, it's an interesting question, but it is largely about view impacts. I think that's the
Yeah.
first.
so you can apply for a variance, right?
To vary the height?
Yeah,
Yes.
so if it was appropriate to have a 3 or a 4-story gondola house or whatever, because of the topography and there's no one behind it, would it be very difficult to get a variance, or, like, is
Yeah.
that a big impediment? This is a question,
Yeah,
I don't
like,
know.
we've
'cause I
never
don't-
had a height variance, and in general, I would discourage people, because I would say essentially that 9 meters is 9 meters across the island. Like, it's one thing setbacks, because we've got all of weird shaped lots, and maybe you end up in a little bit of a setback, and maybe it doesn't affect the neighbors, but we would say generally, like, lot coverage and the height are sort of uniform, and we would
Mhm.
generally support that, and say, well, everyone has the same rules for height. But in theory, if you come to council, and people always have the option to go to council to vary it.
Right now, it's 9 meters to the peak or 9 meters to the middle of the roof,
So if you are the middle one,
Yeah.
you're going, that would be to your midpoint.
midpoint.
To here.
Yeah. And it depends, we calculate it differently, do you have a ceiling or if it's a vaulted
Right.
attic space?
Nine meters is pretty high, that's
30
three
feet, yeah.
9-foot floors. Or
Yeah,
am
it's
my math off?
33.
In theory,
Yeah,
it's 3 stories in thery.
Yeah, 3 stories already, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in our zoning, so I pulled up just on the board here, this is like our most typical zone, is the SR2 zone. So essentially, we regulate lot coverage and height, and that's how we do it. So we don't, most of our zones don't have any kind of floor area. So we essentially say this is how big your building can be, this is how tall, and so people can decide within that how they
This-
fill it.
This is different from quite a number of other bylaws where, so the thrust of this, Kirsty, just to answer your question, and kind of goes to your question too, David, is about that nasty word density. This is one way of limiting density without using the concept of floor space ratio. So you limit the height, you limit the footprint, so you've limited the volume of building that can be built. The other way to do it is to say, well, in residential zone, you would an FSR of 0.6. And that's, then so you get 60% of your lot area as built building.
So
And
is this,
that's doing it in a different way. It's slightly more complex. I don't know whether one's more beneficial than the other. Do we have FSR? There is some FSR.
We do have FSR in some,
Yeah.
basically mostly in the cove.
so is this just for single-family dwellings, or would it,
This would apply to any of our buildings.
so multifamily, apartment building,
Yeah.
if somebody gets,
So
Yeah.
so
In
something like
this-
Belterra,
at the workshop here.
Yeah, they'll have a height limit.
they match?
Dude,
In this workshop here, one of the issues that was raised is, the community lands workshop is, okay, how come the housing we've been looking for 15, 20 years in the Cove to provide some more affordable, some density in the Cove never gets built? And there was sort of an assumption in the room that our rules are restrictive rather than permissive.
Yeah.
They're there to stop things.
Yeah.
And presumably the height, that came up as one of the issues.
well.
So,
yeah.
So I don't know, I mean, this is
I think
different
that's a
from,
perspective.
well, that is a perspective, but that was a
Yeah.
perspective that was in the room.
Right, so it's interesting because most, all municipalities and regional districts have some form of regulation.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I would say, David, in general, probably then that's looking at like heights that we allow
Yeah.
in, say, Sun Cove, where we allow multifamily,
Yeah,
and is the height
yeah,
appropriate?
yeah.
And the height's limited by our ability to fight fires.
Well,
I know that's been, like, the previous fire chief had brought that up, and I haven't heard that, like, I've asked Ian several times, and he's not as,
So we could go another 4, as opposed to 3, we
The
could go 4.
building code does it for us, because the building code allows a maximum 4-story wood frame building. Right.
But that 4, right now, we're limited to 3.
We're not allowing.
Yeah, we're not allowing 4.
Are we not allowing it, or that's just an anecdotal thing that's been kicking?
yeah, so like, Area 1 got rezoned, and it allows a height of, I would say, is it 12 or 14 meters?
Right.
The pub, I believe, has 4
They got
distinct
relaxation,
levels
yeah.
within it.
So was that a
That was a
people went for a variance
They
or?
rezone.
It's a rezone,
It's a
so,
rezoning, yeah.
because that's certainly something that I think we do want to encourage is the 4-story walk-ups,
Yeah.
to allow the cheap building and density.
Yeah.
So, roofs?
I like it.
So what I'm hearing, ABC basically has no issue counting a shed roof as a
No.
pitch.
I
to
think-
go to
I
the
think
point
that's-
in terms
Good,
of
I think
height,
that's
yeah.
correct.
I think we definitely recommend that.
Yeah.
And where are we at now in that?
This whole process?
No, just.
Right now, I think it's unclear about shed roofs.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
It's sort of vague, and as I've been told when I started, when we do it, is that we interpret it as saying shed roof emissions.
Yeah, okay.
You measure to the peak. This is essentially how we interpret it.
So this would change that.
Yeah. So the next one that Drew is sketched up here is grade.
Right.
So average natural, average finished grade. So essentially, when we measure height, we essentially we figure out where we start counting from, and then the picture talks about where we measure up to, and then we
Right.
just measure the difference, and we say that's 9 meters. And it's fine if you're on a flat lot. It's really straightforward. You go, okay, this is obviously grade. So when I was in Kitimat, they're all like sites that were leveled in the 50s, and we never even talked about grade. It was just like, this is just round, right here, and you go on. That's yeah. And then I came to Bowen and learned all about different ways to measure it. So,
Yeah.
so Drew's shown, a nicely sloping lot, so you can see this is 4 corners. What we would do now, if you were trying to build this house on a lot and you were submitting a site plan, we would say, okay, show us, there's 4 corners on this house, A, B, C, and D. For each of those, tell us the grade. So tell us both the natural, what it is now, and then finished, where your house is gonna end up.
So if you had topography running through here, so you can kind of see, you know, the lots, let's say, falling down this way. Let's say it's 100 feet here, it's 100 feet here, it's 95 feet here, and it's 90 feet here. You add the 4 corners up, you divide by 4, and that's the number you use to measure up from.
Yeah. And then we ask,
From the middle of the building.
nope, so
No,
then
that's
essentially,
all
to
average.
the midpoint point of your roof.
Right.
so you
So,
would,
so you take, so there's a new imaginary line that you're measuring from
Right.
through here.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're measuring up from there
To there.
to the midpoint.
Yeah.
Does that work? Like, is that, it seems,
Yeah.
I think the more simple it is, the better.
so it works. What you can do is you can play games with it. So right now we've got a square. If you put a little crop, you know, up here,
Right.
Let's
Oh,
put,
right.
what's it add on up on the uphill
Up
side?
on the uphill
you
side.
now have got
We're gonna
however
put
many
more
more
corners
corners
add in
there.
there.
Right.
Those are gonna push
Change
everything
the average
up,
way uphill.
right?
Does the
Yeah.
games matter?
People play games.
But so what? I'm really just
Yeah.
asking,
Yeah.
so
Why do we care?
why do we care?
I think we care because again, it's sort of like you end up with a much bigger building than almost we intend, and it's like looking at, okay, do other people measure? Because everybody measures it somehow, right? So you're gonna measure it some way that maybe doesn't incentivize games.
Again,
where
it
you
comes
want
back, it comes back to density. The whole thing
Yeah.
is about density. So,
Well, I could question about density. Does density, do we really care
Is it
about
bad?
density? I mean, if we, the problem I have is we've got basically hardly any setbacks on properties, really minimal. And so if we had decent setbacks, like from
I think
streets,
setbacks are big.
I don't know, I keep seeing 1.5 meters.
Side
Our
side
standard,
yards
like
are
our
3
standard
meters
SR2
and
is 7.5 and 3.
7.5
okay.
front and back
Okay.
and 3 on
Okay.
sides.
Okay. Where have I been seeing the one?
So
That was
some of
probably
the, like some of the,
Something
like,
Well,
And I think
So
even building right up.
40 by 100.
But,
This is a from which height is measured.
so now you're talking,
No,
Okay.
no,
So-
well, the terminology is always the lesser. We,
Per
you
document.
can't stack afterwards and say, well, I'm gonna measure from up here. Measure version on Salt Spring, where 2 meters from the buildings, and those are the 4 points you use to determine.
from every wall segment?
So what if you have
They,
a,
they do it very simplistically, as if it were just a simple
box.
rectangle.
Okay.
so you can't add a little extension to change, fiddle around with it?
I presume not. The building is a more accurate way of doing
Yeah.
it. Richmond uses that concept that you have to work with them.
That's very complicated for
Sloping site that
Yeah.
falls in 2 directions.
It's a proportion of the total perimeter of the building, and they say this is this high, and it's this proportion of the total, and you end up.
And that's not bad, that's not as complex.
Is that gonna be to us, our island?
I mean, you can game it, you know, it depends how steeply slopey you are.
If you have a pretty steeply sloping lot and it's fairly large, so you're not, so then the setbacks are not really coming into
Yeah.
play in the picture.
But,
Then you can move things
yeah,
around.
but is that a problem? Is it?
I would say it becomes a problem for the neighbors. That's what's a problem for. Neighbors have certain expectations. Suddenly the house is, you know, if they've made it 2 or 3 meters higher than, you know, they could have or something. So it just feels bigger. So for example, there's a house that went in on Seaview that for a while was quite visible on Kate's Hill. It was visible when it was being built and stuff, but it's exactly 9 meters high, and it's
Is
got
that the
it's,
new one?
yeah, it's got a
Yeah.
quite steep roof, and so their midpoint ends up quite high, and they sort of carefully designed it to be right at the top of the averages and stuff. So it's like the highest, and I think we heard from basically every Kate's Hill resident
Yeah.
about that building.
It looks really out of place when
Yeah.
you drive
Yeah.
down the road. They go, whoa, geez.
So that's always it,
Yeah.
essentially, is that, you know, it's the person who built something that the neighbors feels out of scale, that just meets the letter of the law, and essentially people felt like it's bigger than
Do
we
you
should.
have an alternative to the points being the ground averaging method?
I debate
What
the
would
West
have, what
End.
would have changed that in that particular situation?
Yeah, yeah.
What
The
technique?
West Van method?
The West End method would have, because they had more points at the higher point of the lot.
Okay.
It wouldn't have made a big difference, it would have dropped it like a foot maybe.
Which, so what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a little bit, like, let's make it simple and let's,
I think it's,
unless it's gonna be a real negative thing in general for the island, let's have it as simple as possible. And if one house is, the neighbors consider it out of proportion, well, we don't want a bunch of Stepford wives housing trapped anyway. Like, I don't know.
hell no. I think the design of that house was always another
Yeah, I mean, that house has
issue,
issues, yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think in
It's just a
general,
block.
I like simple up until the point where it becomes interpretive, and I tend to try to leave that out
Well,
because.
these are numbers you would do the
Yeah,
calculation.
so essentially like the points I like because it's quite straightforward, and if there's some different way to calculate the points is nice. Some other people talk about, essentially you pretend like it's a square and you put 4 points in, and then it gets quite interpretive, people saying, well, no. Yeah, so the ceiling to the peak. Or if it's open, then you go up 8 feet and you go halfway between the peak. And essentially it's for the houses that, like if your house, if you're 4 and you go up really high and then you start to, your eaves are higher up or something like that. We don't just go halfway from the eaves, but we go halfway from essentially where we determine the next floor is.
Oh,
So if this had a shallow pitch roof on it,
uh-huh, yeah,
and the walls came up,
yeah,
but this has some slope to it, so your midpoint is up here,
yeah,
not down.
yeah.
A bit higher than that, yeah.
Yeah, well, and so it doesn't matter whether it's opened or closed inside the box.
It only matters because it affects the exterior. It's just a way of stopping the exterior from getting out of control. It's not the plan is going to be in the
So-
bedroom.
Well,
I don't
that
think.
goes, that goes back to, if we're doing the building height up to the
Yeah.
halfway on the slope, and halfway on the slope, even on a shed roof,
Yeah.
who cares whether they just have exposed beams inside or not?
Right, so we do it in part because if you think about like an A-frame building, somebody
Yeah.
says, well, the whole thing is the eaves,
Yeah.
even though there's
Yeah.
3 stories inside it,
Oh,
right?
okay.
We say, no, we don't, we count, we're gonna go up to the top story, and then we're gonna go up the height of that, and then we're gonna say that's where it starts to pitch, that we measure the midpoint to.
Oh, I see.
So you got witch's hat.
Yeah.
You don't
So
get
you
to
have
just
floors
say-
in
there, yeah. Then you go halfway from the last one.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so my 18-meter building's not possible.
Unless you just have 1 floor, and then it went up 18 meters, because then, right? If you really want to display your neighbors, it's a.
Okay, thanks.
I see, okay. It's to avoid that one
Yeah.
A-frame issue. Well, yeah, you could, yeah.
Or even like, like all the houses just about on Kate's Hill, right? The 3rd floor is within the pitch, right? So even though, but then we say, no, we measure from up here.
It's up in here somewhere.
Yeah.
What do you do with a house that's basically like you've shown there, but they put windows off the side? Like they,
Dormers.
A dormer?
yeah,
Yeah.
where's the pitch, where's the midpoint then?
So again, we would look at where the floor of the story is.
Same place.
Yeah.
If you put a dormer on both sides?
It doesn't matter. because the peak is still at the same point,
Yeah.
And that's only,
and the floors are
Some,
the
some
same height.
bylaws talk about the size of the dormer. If the dormer is less than 75% of the volume or something,
So
that's
that-
not,
that's
it's
low.
not factored. I think that's even written in a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So as to avoid big volume.
So,
that's
so the
good.
sense I got is PPC isn't super concerned with tabulation, would like it to remain something simple that's
Yeah.
adaptable.
Simple.
achievable.
Simple as possible. Keep it simple.
Yeah, I don't know that the West Van version is so complex. I think it would be worth
Yeah.
giving that some thought.
Yeah,
I think the version we have now is not bad.
yeah,
And it's certainly, and it's not unique, it's used quite a
Yeah,
bit. So,
yeah.
um,
yeah, definitely going through the examples, you're always like, oh, ours is better than a lot of people.
Yeah.
But some of these, you can tell how detailed people get in grade depending if you have urban flat lots versus if you're somewhere with
Yeah.
steep.
Yeah.
So West Van gets quite complicated because they have steep lots and they have people with lots of money who are
Yeah.
willing to, right, and they're paying for square footage, and they're willing to like play
Yeah.
all the games to get your maximum square footage, so you end up
Yeah.
with more detail.
And then there's Lions Bay that covers structures without a roof.
Yeah, I saw a few of those, I was like, oh,
What?
okay, I guess so.
yeah.
Without a roof.
Well, we have
Yeah.
some challenges in our
I
bylaw,
don't
things
know
you
if
can
that
put
would
up inside yours,
Yeah.
like internet retaining walls that are 8 foot
Yes,
high.
yes.
Yeah.
So it sounds like keep it simple, Sam.
Yeah.
yeah.
So the next one I was gonna talk about was lot coverage. So let me find your definition. Find it. So, and so it, like in the SR2, this is essentially it. In most of our zones, we go lot coverage. So the lot coverage, the percentage of the lot area covered by the horizontal footprint of all buildings and structures, including accessory buildings or structures. So this comes into play like just about every lot in, definitely some point is over their lot coverage. A lot of houses in Deep Bay, like in the Loop, are at their lot coverage, or when they rebuild, they're all at their lot coverage. So we do actually come up, people, figure out exactly what they do and build into that. So how we interpret it right now is we say horizontal footprint, and so to do that, we look at essentially on the site plan where it meets the ground. Where it gets funny is where there are, like when there's a roof overhang and
Yeah.
the pillars come down, we say, okay, that's not included in your lot coverage.
So they don't have pillars, it's not included.
Yeah, and same with if people do, if you would do a bay window or a dormer out, again, we would say
It
that
doesn't
that's
come
not
down to the
included.
ground,
It's not
it's-
touching the ground, because we'd say
it's
it's
not
not
covered.
changing the horizontal footprint, so footprint being where it's, impacting the ground.
Okay, so if you had a big cantilever deck
Yeah.
or something, it wouldn't be included?
Yeah.
So is that a problem?
I mean, again, it's that problem of, like I said, we have lots of properties that are right at the limit. And so I tend to feel it's a problem anytime where people can build things that feel like that that's not actually what council intended. And I would tend to say that if council thinks that, well, on small lots, maybe it's not fair, people should have more lot coverage, then we should just change and give people more lot coverage, rather than people saying, I'm now gonna, my bedrooms on each side are just gonna project out, I'm gonna have steel beams and then we're gonna go 8 feet out each side.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
right
touch
on,
the ground
yeah.
until we're 6 inches
Yeah.
off the ground. I feel like,
Yeah.
well, it seems like, council set a limit, and they felt this is an appropriate limit. If it's not appropriate, we should just change the limit, and rather than have flaky rules.
one of those.
What are we doing for percentage now?
10% plus 100 square meters.
10% plus 100 square meters?
Yeah, yeah.
Plus 100 square meters?
Yeah.
Another house?
So on, yeah, so basically means, like, that's the SR2, so that's Deep Bay, that's Sun Point. So basically means if you're 1 acre in size, you max out at the 500 square meters. And that comes down to that, but
And it includes accessory buildings.
it includes accessory buildings, so if you have a garage and a woodshed and stuff, that all counts within it. And if you have decks, that counts within it too.
There's no upside limit,
Yeah.
To a maximum of 500 square meters.
regardless of the size of your lot.
Yeah, so like I said, in the SR2, that means that at an acre, you've maxed out. It's right, just about, if you're 0.4 hectares, you get 500 square meters, and that's your maximum. In the rural, it goes up to 1,500 square meters, which is like 16,000 square feet, and you hit that maximum at 10 acres. So if you're Cape Roger Curtis, you can build 16,000 square feet of coverage or like,
In the definitions, what's excluded?
Yeah.
Fireplaces, exterior stairs.
so that's the floor area in the lot coverage. This is all it says, and nothing's excluded from the lot coverage. So when we go floor area, we have exclusions, but lot coverage just says horizontal footprint.
Right.
So that would include a balcony, set of steps going down, back porch, that would all be part of your lot coverage, would it?
Well, so again, that would be included with what touches the ground. How we would say.
Oh,
So what do you have a recommendation, or are you looking just for input?
Why,
I guess
why,
you
why
put more
not
than
just
recommendation.
have a maximum lot coverage, period, as opposed to the 100 square meters, you know, plus 100.
Plus.
You know, plus up to a max.
I think because it is that it changes with lot size.
Well, it would change,
Still be
if you
the same.
said, but if you said, so if you said, you can actually,
Yeah.
build on 50% of the lot,
Yeah.
Square meters.
then, but as the lot gets bigger,
Yeah.
You can get big.
you get bigger.
Yeah.
So what's wrong with a simple thing like that?
So not have
Less
the,
than-
I mean, the 100 square meters plus the percentage means essentially as you get smaller,
Square meters.
you don't get smaller in the same percentage. If you're
Right.
smaller lot, you can cover more of your lot.
Right.
And in part of it's because it's like, that's,
Logarithmic scale or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah,
you'd end up with a curve that,
Yeah.
yeah, curves.
yeah.
1,000 square feet.
And in part that's because then essentially means, you know, they're on smaller lots, they end up with enough lot coverage so they can build a house.
Yeah.
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 Gibson's is the most onerous.
Yeah.
It's really scary. Yeah, pretty much everything, including paving,
Yeah.
is counted. The, I think one that I run across before and that I find kind of challenging is roof overhang. So it's as if you were flying over the lot, you're looking down, everything you see, which means the roof, not the building, but the roof is included in lot coverage. And that to me, in the West Coast climate where you want big roof overhangs because it rains a lot,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a disincentive to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So I think that part of it, I think, is written correctly, because we don't do that here.
Yeah.
Some areas exclude decks that are less than 2 feet above the ground.
Yeah.
We don't exclude anything.
No.
Patios are excluded, aren't they?
Patio, so we would say, yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
part-
in our interpretation, we would say if it's less than 2 feet,
Yeah.
that it's not a building or structure, it's landscaping or it's patio.
So it's part of the hard landscape,
Yeah.
it's not lot coverage.
Yeah. But if you go up 3 feet, then it's no lot coverage.
Right.
Yeah.
And that can be tricky on an island that has a lot of sloping ground.
Yeah, because you
You
end up,
can suddenly get more than 2 feet above the ground in a hurry.
Yeah, I know, because I ran into that problem.
Right.
unless you have a deck that, yeah, goes. like
Yes,
this,
yeah. So, but this particular component of the bylaw has probably not been challenged, or hasn't.
I think it more gets challenged in sort of the overhang, like projections. We start asking, well, how far can I project my building out?
Right. Yeah.
But
And
they
so that-
still have to meet this, the setbacks and set forwards.
Yeah.
That's for the
Yeah.
eaves as well, right?
So yeah, so you're allowed a projection of into the setbacks of the eaves.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a
seven.
different thing.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a future APC is going to talk about setback exceptions. So
But currently, the eaves around the building on Bowen are not counted. So, but what Dan is talking about is if you were to build your house like this, and then the lower floor
Yeah.
that's sitting
Yeah.
is here,
Yeah.
right? This piece is not counted. Your lot
Yeah.
coverage is limited to that piece there.
Why wouldn't you count the overhangs and the eaves and just change the percentage? I mean, I don't know how you come up with, I don't know how you come
Yeah, I
up with
think
a
it's,
percent. That would be the simplest way to do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually think
Small
the, you can keep the, you could not, you could continue to exclude roof overhangs, but not exclude projecting volumes of the building.
I mean, I think some of these definitions talk about measured from the outermost perimeter of all buildings.
Right.
Or something like that.
So, you know, so if you've got a bay window, that counts,
Yeah,
because that's a projection of the volume of the building, but if you've got a roof that goes beyond the bay window, that doesn't count.
yeah.
And that's, so
That
these,
seems fair. Yeah.
Well, and that affects rainwater and absorption and things like that.
Yeah, it's true. Like if your roof goes out forever, you've altered your drainage more than.
Yeah.
Keeps your basement dry.
Yeah.
so what I'm hearing around the table with the commission here, Daniel, is that,
Keep it
that
simple.
well, yes, and any building volume,
Yeah.
irrespective of how it's supported,
Yeah.
by the air, by posts, by the foundation, should be counted in the
Yeah.
lot coverage.
If that, and I agree with that change, would that have changed a bunch of permissions that have gone through?
I mean, probably some. Yeah. Some would have. Yeah, well, some will have said, well, gee, you're over your lot coverage. And they'll say, well, we're just gonna, you know, we're gonna project out 4 feet, this whole bit. This whole
So,
wall.
but if they're gonna,
So yes, then if they burned down and they came to rebuild, we would say now you have to rebuild under our current bylaw, and current definition of lot coverage. So they would, so as long as the building's there, it doesn't matter. Building burns down, they have to rebuild, yeah. To meet our new current. I mean, it's no different, like, I think almost every building in Stud Point is over our lot coverage. At least everyone that I've encountered.
so anyone that burns down,
Yeah,
they're toast,
yeah. And as they're doing renovations, they're trying to figure out, because you can repair and maintain
yes.
you're over, as long as you were legally built at the time, as long as you, so they're trying to figure out how
Yeah.
they can swap stuff out. And,
Are they that much over that's that kind of issue?
you know. It's more as soon as you become a bit over, you kind of, I think, if you renovate, you don't really want to give stuff up, so you
Right.
stay at your over.
So, is it you're asking really, the question you're asking the commission is about how to interpret that definition, not about whether there should be a change to the percentages. That's a different question.
I would say that's a different question in terms of, yeah.
Because what Bowen Island is currently doing, particularly if we reinforce the concept of cantilevers being included, is consistent with virtually every
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, like, most people, you know, they know that's their maximum, their sort of design, and they don't go
Right,
the gimmicky route.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only one I saw where roofs were included was, it doesn't really matter, but that to me is overly onerous.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've seen, some too say, like, you can have a production of a certain amount, like, they limit it.
Yeah, and then all the roofs in your municipality have 2-foot overhangs.
Yeah. Yeah, you could make it bigger, you could say 1.25 meters, something like 4 foot.
Yeah, yeah,
But you-
because North Van, I'm not sure what his lot coverage or, I think it would be. Did you look at District North Van? It's not on
I'm
the
not
list.
sure, it's on the list, probably not. But-
Is there something there? But they have a 4-foot allowable roof overhang.
And so every roof is 4 foot.
No, but they're bigger.
Okay.
It's about. Yeah, so
Okay, sorry. So then the last one, floor area. So this one, like, as we said, so not many of our zones regulate floor area, but where we're floor area limit, and so we're seeing next the limits. We have a limit for secondary, is that if it's a secondary suite, that it's. So
Bigger walls than that.
we centimeters, and I did
Too excited about that. Yeah, obviously, there's not gonna be anybody living in there if you've got 4 feet of flat space and then it's going up
And
the side. like
if
that.
you have just open space under your building, it won't count, like if it doesn't have a floor, it's not captured.
Yeah,
So
so-
if you're building, you know, you got your foundation walls, but it's
There's
just dirt right
piles.
underneath. It's not, yeah, because it says it's having a floor and a ceiling,
Yeah.
2 meters apart.
I'd be very suspect if somebody put in there, you know, a ceiling of just an inch under 2 meters. Because obviously it's gonna be habitable space.
Right.
There's no question. They're not, you know, it's not being considered.
For short people.
Well, yeah, certain kinds, with exclusions. Yeah. And if you did change it down to 5 feet, you'd find that everybody just went down to 2 feet or something.
I think the one thing that we should be mindful of is that there's the potential, I imagine, going forward, that at some point, the floor space ratio concept will be adopted by the municipality in
Yeah.
residential zones. And whatever the definition of floor area is, will start to impact houses as well.
Yeah, I mean, I see our challenge is we have such a great almost variety of sizes, like all of Deep Bay are essentially, they're like quarter-acre lots,
Mhm.
and we don't allow quarter-acre lots even in that zone. Like the SR2 is a minimum lot size of half an acre.
Right.
So I mean, I guess similar to lot coverage, but I say, you know, if we said like 0.6 or something, it would be such a big variation between, like the large lots you end up with more floor than you'd ever possibly use, and your little lots might be more
No, I
restricted.
think the one that I brought to, was it 3 years ago? They call the Gary built house
Yeah,
in, out at Eagle Tree.
yeah,
With the circular
Yeah.
plot.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a beauty.
yeah,
Yeah, where the front and rear and side lot lines.
yeah, those
And
ones,
it's a
yeah.
60-foot diameter circle. Your lot coverage is pretty limited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I don't know, I'm not sure that I would be in favor of setting floor area maximums anywhere. I mean, why? If you have a lot coverage restriction,
Yeah, you don't need it.
and you have a height,
That's
and
all
you have a setback, then those are the key factors. Whether you have a big house or not shouldn't really matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy with how we do it right now for houses. Essentially, we set the envelope, right? We say you can be this and this high, and
Yeah, just
then we don't get worried.
set the envelope from the outside, and then they can build whatever they within it. Yeah.
But in terms of this, I'm hearing definite support for measuring to the inside, find some way to expand
Yeah,
pedestrian
definitely.
walls.
Yeah.
And measuring to the inside and reducing the, from 2 meters down to 1.5 meters is probably, I think it's probably, because the intention there, probably, perhaps not understood when it was written, but the intention is that those spaces are not habitable spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're full agreement on that.
Yeah.
And I heard some
Yeah.
But I think that's what, yeah, not even looking, like if Steph has notes, that's all we're looking for, is rather than a motion, just essentially comment at this point, and more so that then, when we come back with it, if we get that far with the bylaw from council, then you'll say, oh, I remember when we talked about this, and you didn't do it all what I said, so
There's lots in the land use bylaw that can
Yeah,
use, can
well,
use this.
well, that's the other
exercise.
thing, I guess, is if you have, if anybody has thoughts, having worked with our land use bylaw, let us know, sort of working through it in terms of, you know, what to target.
Yeah.
With a goal
The
being like a
the whole
target.
front end, I mean, you're looking at some of the definitions, and
Yeah.
that's good. I think the exemptions and all of that needs to be
Yeah.
revisited as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so the goal of it being updated, so it's not being like changes, so we're not looking at changing, you know, like number of lots or anything like
Yeah.
that's major, but just saying, okay, what are things in it that are outdated, or what causes us grief?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I think maybe next meeting we'll bring exceptions and or exemptions, and we'll go from there.
Sure. That'd be good. Citing exceptions and,
Yeah, I'm just thinking that section, yeah, retaining walls and.
yeah, retaining walls.
Ooh.
Setbacks to the natural boundary.
Yeah.
What can and not occur there.
Yeah, all those fun things.
Yeah. Great. All right then, thank you.
Great, thanks.
So, were we doing anything about 6.2? The community lands workshop?
information item.
That's your information.
Yeah, along with the,
Can I hang on to this, David? Or is this a-
Oh, that one was,
yeah, did
that's my
anyone
office
want
copy.
Oh, you're gonna copy it?
I was saying that was my office copy. I think we may have more printed, but I'm not sure. But I was gonna steal one back.
who would like a printed copy?
I would.
I would.
1, 2,
Well, actually, I will, because I had trouble printing it.
3,
I've already got one.
okay,
3 it is. Final
Can I
offer.
get an electronic version?
you have, it will be in the revised, I did the revised
Okay.
tomorrow.
All right.
Yeah.
Good. Great. The next meeting is
October
October
22nd.
22nd,
Stuff in my head. Isn't that a council meeting? Right?
Monday.
That's the one right after the election. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I bet
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
final council meeting of this council.
That's an evening meeting?
Would be, yeah.
Oh, it might be a daytime though.
Yeah, council's during the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Cool.
that's you
Okay,
doing a
perfect.
16-hour
Okay,
day,
excellent.
sorry.
Lucky you.
Okay. Perfect.
David?
I move the whole meeting adjourned.
that's what we're waiting
Good to
for.
hear, David.
That's
Second
a
for that.
while.
Seconder,
Doesn't require a
all in
second.
favor?
No.
We're adjourned.
Beauty.
Light up.
Thanks, Drew.
I'm gonna just-
Thank you all.
There's no discussion.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting stuff, eh?
Well,
It's good. It's been interesting.